I walked back into the great hall on the night they had all agreed I was gone for good, and 200 wolves, who had watched me dismissed, without a second glance went down on one knee, and not one of them was kneeling to me. They were kneeling to the child I carried. Soren stood on the days where he had broken me 3 seasons before, and I watched the color leave a face I had once believed could not be moved, and I let the silence do the work my voice did not need to do. I had rehearsed something cutting for this moment on 300 of Cold Road. I did not say it. I only stood there with his bloodline under my heart and let him count in front of his own court exactly what he had handed away on a clear autumn night when he thought he was being merciful. He made his choice in front of everyone. He just had not known what he was losing when he made it. But I am ahead of the story, and you do not yet know why a man would look at his own fated mate and name another woman his queen. Neither did I that night. Let me take you back to before I understood any of it. Back to the choosing, where I still believed the worst of him and was right for all the wrong reasons. It began in the autumn of my 22nd year when I was nobody and had made an art of being content with it. I kept the pack rolls. That was my work and my whole place in the world. The great ledgers of birth and death and bloodline, the parchment memory of who belonged to the Iron Territories and how far back their blood ran. I knew every name in the pack, and not one of those names knew mine, which suited me well enough. An archavist sees everything and is seen by no one. I had made a quiet life of it in a quiet room, and I told myself most days that I preferred it that way. What I did not tell myself was the truth, which was that the Alpha King knew my name and had known it for 2 years, and that the one thing between us was the single thing I had never written down in any roll. The make bond does not arrive politely. It had found the 2 of us in the archive on a winter night 2 years before the choosing when Soren came down looking for the record of his sister's death, and found me instead in the lamplight with the old ledges open in front of me. His wolf rose in him so hard and so fast that he gripped the edge of my reading table until the old oak split down the grain, and neither of us said the word for what had just happened. We were careful after that. A king does not wed the woman who dusts his ledgers. The court would have made a meal of her. So we kept it to the archive and the dark and a handful of stolen seasons. And I told myself the whole time that careful was the same thing as safe. It is not. I know that now. And I should have known it sooner, because in the last week before the choosing he had begun to change, and I had read it wrong the way I read everything wrong that autumn. He came to the archive the night before they hung the hall with the Eastern colors. He did not come for a record. He stood in the doorway with the lamplight on him and did not sit which he always sat. And he looked at the split oak table for a long moment as though it had asked him a question he could not answer. "You are quiet tonight," I said. I did not look up from the roll. I had learned that he spoke more freely to the side of my face than to the front of it. "There is a thing I have to do," he said, "that I have decided is the only right thing, and every part of me hates it." His hand had found the edge of a shelf. His hands always went looking for edges when the rest of him was holding still. "Tell me, archavist, if a man could keep a thing safe only by being seen to throw it away, if the keeping looked exactly like the losing to everyone, even to the thing itself, do you think it could be done?" I think I said, and I did look up then, that a man who decides a thing for someone else's good has usually decided it for his own comfort and dressed it up. Ask the thing, it might surprise you. Something crossed his face that I took for tiredness. I know now it was a man hearing the truth one day too late to use it. He did not ask me anything. He said good night and he left. And the next day he stood up in the hall and threw me as far from himself as he could and made the whole world watch him do it. By that autumn, I was 6 weeks gone with his child, and I had not yet found the nerve to tell him, because telling him made it real, and real meant the court, and the court meant a danger I did not yet have a name for. So I carried the secret down into the hall on the night of the choosing, meaning to tell him after when the formal business was done. Then he stood up in front of the full hall and chose Astrid. I was there below the days holding the very roll I was meant to inscribe with the new Luna's name in my own careful hand. I heard him say it. Astrid, daughter of the Eastern Pack, a woman with a face like cut glass and a bloodline 3 centuries deep. I heard him give her in front of 200 witnesses the words that had been mine in the dark. And I felt the bond, our bond, the one his wolf had split an oak table over, go silent in my chest, as though he had reached the whole length of the hall and quietly closed a door inside me. And then, in the same breath, his wolf called him a liar. I will tell you what 200 people saw, because I have since heard it told 100 ways, and most of them are wrong. They saw the Alpha King name his chosen Luna and lift the Luna's cup to offer it to her. And in the same instant, before his hand had finished the gesture, they saw him turn his whole body against his own will, a wrench so violent that it staggered him a half-step sideways on the days toward the archavist standing below the salt. Toward me. His wolf surfaced in his eyes, gold drowning the gray. And for one helpless heartbeat, the most powerful creature in the territories strained toward a nobody with a ledger in her hands, as though she were the one fixed point in a world that was falling. Then he mastered it. The gray came back over the gold like ice over a pond. He turned to Astrid and put the cup in her hands and did not look at me again for the rest of the night. If you had asked me in that moment what I had just witnessed, I would have told you I had watched a coward's body betray a coward's choice. I would have been wrong about the coward. I was not wrong that it was a betrayal. I simply had the direction of it backwards, and it was going to cost me 300 and a hard winter to learn which way the cruelty actually ran. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the cold archive with the unsigned Luna's roll in front of me, and I made a decision that the dry, careful woman who kept the rolls would never have made, and that the woman his wolf had lunged for made without one tremor of her hand. I would not raise his heir in the long shadow of another woman's crown. I would not be the secret kept in the margin of his life, while Astrid's name went into the ledger in gold leaf. So I packed what I could carry on my back, and I took with me the one record in that whole archive that truly mattered. And before the first gray of morning, I walked out of the only home I had ever had, with the entire royal bloodline of the Iron Territories asleep beneath my ribs. And I did not look back at the tower where he slept. By the time the sun cleared the trees, I was on the forest road. By the time his advisors found the Luna's roll unsigned and the Archavist's chair empty, I was past the border stones. And somewhere behind me, I would learn much later a king had gone down into a cold archive at first light, looking for the woman who dusted his ledgers, and found a split oak table and an empty chair, and had said nothing at all to anyone for a very long time. If you have ever been the secret someone kept instead of the choice someone made, if you want to know what it costs a man to learn the difference between the two only after he has thrown it away, stay with me. Follow her. Do not lose the thread. Because what I found out on that road unmade everything I thought I knew the night he chose another. And the truth was harder and stranger than either of us deserved. I went east to a healer's hold beyond the territories where no one had ever heard of the pack rolls or the grayed woman who kept them. I worked. I grew. I learned to be Aller with no king, which was a great deal harder than I am going to pretend, and which I came in time to like. The healer there was an old woman with no patience for self-pity. And she put a knife in my hand the first week, and a birthing stool under my eyes the second. And between the two, she made a different woman of me than the one who had walked the forest road. And in the deep of that first winter, a rider came through the hold, half dead in the snow, with the gray and iron device of my old pack on his frozen cloak. I knew his face before I knew his name in my mouth. Edric Soren's second, the man I had written into the margins of my own rolls 100 times. The one soul in that whole fortress who had ever spoken to me as though I were a person and not a function of the archive. He had not come for me. He had come fleeing, gut-shot and frost-bitten and half out of his head, running from the very court I had run from myself. But the bond does not let go clean, and when his eyes cleared enough to see whose hands were packing his wound, the hardest man I had ever known began to weep, which I would not have believed that man could do. "You have to come back," he said. "I have nothing to come back to. You have everything to come back to." His hand closed around my wrist with what strength he had left. "Ola, you ran before you knew. He never chose her. He was made to." And there, kneeling in the straw, with a dying man's blood drying on my hands, the story I had carried for a whole winter came apart at the seams. Here is what Edric told me in pieces over the 3 days it took me to decide whether he was going to live or die under my hands. The Eastern pack had not come to the choosing as suitors. They had come as a threat, wearing court clothes. Astrid's father held the blood treaty, an old binding right older than Soren's crown, older than his father's. It bound the two packs to a single condition. An heir of the royal iron line wed into the Eastern blood before the old king's grandson came of age or the treaty broke, and the Eastern wolves took the passes, and the passes ran red. Soren's grandfather had signed it in a famine year to keep his people from starving through a war. It had come due in Soren's own reign, and the man who held the terms of it, who pressed them, who whispered the cost of breaking it into the king's ear every single day of that long autumn, was not Astrid's father at all. It was Distan, the king's own treaty broker, the trusted advisor who had brokered the marriage for his own assent, because a king wed to the Eastern blood by Distan's hand was a king who would owe Distan everything. And a king who instead wed a lowborn Archavist for love was a king that Distan could not steer at all. DSD had known about us. Of course he had. He read the same rolls that I kept. And Distan had told the king a thing that was almost entirely true, which is the most dangerous kind of lie there is. That if Soren stood up in that hall and named his fated mate, his nobody, his Archavist, a woman with no rank and no pack blood to shield her, the Eastern pack would call it the broken treaty and march. And the first death in that war, the death that would teach the sentimental young king the cost of his softness, would be hers. Mine. He believed it, Edric said, staring at the rafters because he could not look at me. Aller. He buried his mother and his sister both to court knives before he was 20. 2 women he loved gone to exactly this, to politics with a blade behind it. When Destan told him you would be the third, he did not hear a threat. He heard a thing he had already lived through twice and sworn he would never live through again. So he stood up in that hall and chose Astrid as cry as he could make himself do it, so that no one, not the Eastern Pack, not Destan, not you, not his own court, would ever again believe that he wanted you. He thought he was burying you somewhere safe where no knife would think to look. He did not know. And here Edric finally turned his head and looked at the swell beneath my apron. That you were already carrying the one thing in the whole world that breaks his treaty wide open, because that is the law beneath the law. The thing Destan had gambled everything on, mine never triggering. An heir of the fated bond, a child of the true mate, freely made outranks any treaty match ever signed. A king's own blood cannot be bargained away by a famine-year contract drawn up before the child was ever dreamed of. The child under my heart did not merely give me a claim to stand against Astrid. It made Destan's whole design collapse the instant anyone in that hall learned it existed. I had walked out the archive door carrying the one weapon that could have saved every one of us, and I had carried it 300 miles in precisely the wrong direction, because I had believed exactly as I was meant to believe, that a king who loved a woman would never be able to be cruel to her face. I went back. Of course, I went back. But understand me clearly, because the court has told this part wrong too. I did not go back for him. I went back because Destan was still in that hall with his hand on the reins of a grieving king. I went back because a child of mine was not going to be born into a world that man had arranged for his own advancement. I went back because I had spent 22 years being the name that no one read, the careful hand in the margin. And I had decided on the Eastern Road that I was finished being margin. I was going to put my line into the ledger of the Iron Territories in my own hand where everyone could see it. Or I was going to die trying. But I had a healer's knife now and Edric at my side, and a winter's worth of resolve where my fear used to live. I timed it because an archavist understands one thing better than anyone. Nothing is true until it has been witnessed. I walked back into the Great Hall on the night of the midwinter court, when the days was full, and the Eastern delegation was watching, and Destan stood at the king's right hand, wearing the small smile of a man who believes he has already won the game. And the whole hall went down on one knee, not to me, but to the truth they could suddenly all see beneath my traveling cloak. To the bloodline, to the heir the pack had prayed for through 3 barren reigns, walking back through the great doors on the body of the woman their king had thrown away in front of all of them. You came in here at the very start of all this. Now you know what it cost me to arrive. Destan recovered his footing first. Men like him always do. An archavist who absconded with a sacred record of the pack, he said smoothly, turning to the hall, spreading the lie before I could plant the truth, returns to us swollen with a peasant's child and a peasant's lie about its sire. This is a theft and a slander, my lords. Seize her, and we will have the record back and the woman judged. The record, I said, my voice did not shake. I have wondered many times since where that calm came from. And I have decided in the end that it had been waiting in me all my life underneath the dust and the careful quiet for a night that finally deserved it. I lifted the roll I had carried out the night I left. The one record in the whole archive that mattered, the bloodline ledger of the royal iron line in my own hand that I had spent 2 years keeping true. I did not steal it, my lord. I keep it. I have always kept it. It is the only thing in this fortress that has ever been entirely mine. And I find myself wondering why the king's own treaty broker is so very eager to have a record burned that he has never once been permitted to read. I turned from him to the dis, and I looked at Soren straight up the length of the hall for the first time in 3 seasons. Ask him, Soren. Ask Destan why he kept you away from the old law all this autumn. Ask him what an heir of the fated bond does to a treaty signed in a famine year by men who are all of them dead. He knows the answer. He has known it since the night you stood up on that dis and did the cruelest thing you have ever done in your life. Because he is the man who told you every day for a season that cruelty was the only kindness you had left. I watched it land. I watched a king who had buried 2 women to court knives understand all at once in front of his entire court that he had been lied into burying a third with his own hands and his own mouth. And that she had come back anyway, alive, with the proof in her arms that the grief he had chosen had never once been necessary. Deston moved fast then, because the truth was out of its cage and loose in the hall, and his only chance left was to make certain that no one who knew it lived to repeat it. There was a blade. I never saw where it came from, only where it was going, which was at me, at the air, at the record, all 3 at once. And this is the part the court still argues over to this day, because two things happened inside the same half-second, and every soul there remembers the one that suited them best. Soren came off the days like a wolf whose patience has finally run all the way out. And I, who had spent a whole winter learning that I would never again stand still and wait to be saved by anyone, put the heavy bloodline ledger up between Destan's knife and my child, so that 300 years of parchment took the blade that had been meant for my belly, and I drove my shoulder up into him, the way the Eastern Road and a hard old healer had taught me. And Destan went down hard onto the flagstones, and then the king was there, and then it was over. They did not execute him. Soren stripped him of name and office, and the treaty he had built his whole life around, and gave him over to the Eastern Pact to judge, whose own daughter Astrid, as it turned out, had wanted that marriage no more than I had, and who stood in her father's hall and testified against Destan with a cold precision I have since learned to respect a great deal. The treaty broke the way Arstan had always feared it would. Not in war, not with the passes running red, but quietly in law, dissolved by the existence of a child it had never been able to bargain for. The passes held. They always could have held. That was the cruelest thing of all. The war he had used to fright a grieving king into throwing me away had never once been as certain as the grief he traded it for. Soren did not touch me that night. In the emptying hall, with the rushes scattered and Destan's men in irons, he stood 3 full paces away from me, the way he had once stood over a split oak table. And he did not reach out, and I understood, looking at the careful distance of him, that he had learned at last, far too late, and at a cost I could only guess at, exactly what reaching for me had once seemed to risk. "I would tell you that I am sorry," he said. "But sorry is a word for the things a man did not mean to do. I meant it. Every word. I stood up in this hall, and I meant every cruel thing I said. Because I had decided all on my own that your life was worth more than your love for me. And I never once came down to the archive and asked you which of the two you would have chosen for yourself." His hand had gone to the back of the nearest chair. I watched his knuckles white against the dark wood. I have been a king for 11 years, and I let a frightened man persuade me that the only way left to keep a thing I loved was to throw it as far from me as I could and make the whole world watch me do it. I will not ask you to forgive that. I am asking you for one thing only: to let me spend whatever is left of my reign learning the difference between protecting you and deciding for you. You should have told me, I said. You should have come down to the archive in the dark the way you used to and told me there was a knife at my throat and a treaty around your neck. And you should have let me decide what to do about my own life and my own child. I have spent 22 years deciding what goes into the rolls and what stays out of them. I think between us I could have managed the keeping of my own name. I know that now. It cost him to say it. I watched the whole 11 years of crown go out of him as the words came. My wolf knew it that night. It tried to tell me. It very nearly tore me off that days, reaching for you while my mouth was busy being noble in front of the eastern wolves. And then the thing his gray face had been holding shut since long before I had ever dusted his ledgers finally broke open. It has always known before I do. It knew you in the archive before I had finished being afraid. It knew the truth on the days while I was still telling the lie. I am done being slower than the best part of me. I have grieved 2 women I could not save. And I almost grieved a third I could have if I had only had the courage to let her save herself. I let him wait. I had earned that. And so had the woman his wolf had lunged for in front of 200 people. And then I crossed the 3 paces myself because I was finished. Finished for good being the woman who got chosen or unchosen by other people standing on daisies. And I took his hand and I put it flat against the place where his heir was waiting. And I let him feel for the first time the second heartbeat he had thrown away without ever knowing it was there. The kiss that came after, I will not give you in detail, except to say that it tasted of nothing at all, the way the truest things always do. And that something I had carried locked shut across 300 cold miles came open in it, and has not closed since. We were wed at the spring Thor in the same great hall, with my own name written into the Lunar's roll in my own hand, because I would be hanged before I let anyone else hold the pen for that line. The child came at midsummer, a daughter, loud and grayed, and already I have always suspected several steps ahead of the rest of us. She delighted the whole pack and terrified her father in roughly equal measure. Edric lived. He stands at her cradle more often than he stands at any post he has been given, and he pretends when caught that this is a matter of duty. A year on, the archive is still mine. I will not be a relic for anyone, crown or no crown. And besides, someone has to keep the rolls honest now that we have all seen with our own eyes what one carefully unkempt record can be made to do. Soren comes down on the winter nights the way he used to and grips the edge of the same old split table. And we do not always say very much, and that has turned out to be its own kind of saying. And now and again, his wolf still gets ahead of him entirely. He will be holding court all gray authority and a king's straight back, and some small thing will move in him, and he will turn his whole body helpless with it toward wherever in the hall I happen to be standing in front of the entire assembled pack exactly as he did the night he chose another woman, and his wolf called him a liar in front of everyone. He has stopped being embarrassed by it. I have stopped pretending I do not love it more than nearly anything. It is after all the one part of him that never once in all of it got me wrong. So tell me before you go, because the court has never agreed on it, and I am genuinely curious where you come down. The night he chose her to keep me safe and never once asked me first. Was that love in the end? Or was it only one more powerful man deciding a woman's whole life for her own good? I have my answer. Soren has his, and he is usually wrong about himself in the most honest way a man can be. Tell me yours down below. And if you want to follow what comes next for the three of us, the daughter's first choosing, and what her wolf does the day she is finally old enough to lunge for someone of her own, comment the air and stay close to the fire. Where are you listening from tonight? There is a chair at our table now, and a ledger that has at long last all of the right names written into it in the right hand. Come and sit. That is the whole of it, her side of the story.